Hello, thank you for joining me on this video, Food Hygiene Rating Scheme. My name's Andy Bowles and I'm a food lawyer. Now, this is a number 30 video in a series of 100 videos on food law topics. Now, you may be watching this video as part of our online training service, in which case you can watch some more detailed webinars. I think there's 3 webinars, 1-hour webinars on this topic, which goes into a lot more detail. And you can also download some associated reference materials to help you go through the process. But if you're watching me here on YouTube, well, you're just as welcome. Right, the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme. Now, I'm going to talk about the scheme as it operates in England, although identical schemes operate in Wales and Northern Ireland. And the reason why I'm referring to England, because in England it's a voluntary scheme, whereas in Wales and Northern Ireland it's subject to law, it's a mandatory scheme. So in Wales and Northern Ireland, the scheme is set out in law and food businesses are required by law to display their food hygiene rating. Whereas in England, they're not required by law to display their rating. So, what is the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme? Well, basically, it has the main purpose of the rating scheme was to allow consumers make informed decisions regarding the hygiene standards of food premises that they visit. Now, remember that when I am talking about these videos, my introductory video, I separated food law into 4 categories. It was food hygiene, food standards, general food law, and import and export. And the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme applies specifically to food hygiene requirements. So food standards requirements are not included within a food hygiene rating scheme. So the standards of provision of information to consumers, labelling, for example, don't fall within the rating scheme. But the whole point of the scheme was to encourage standards by food businesses having their rating displayed. And although it's not a requirement to have it displayed on premises in England, the ratings are displayed on the Food Standards Agency website, so consumers will have access to it. And the overall aim is, of course, to try and reduce food poisoning by improving standards, and for those premises that are not performing well, for consumers to make their own decisions, voting with their feet. The rating scheme is a 6-tier system. So it rates from 5, which is this very good. So if you're a food establishment and you've got a rating of 5, very well done. It shows you are truly committed to providing safe food and looking after the health and well-being of your consumers, your customers. A 4 is still actually good. I mean, that is a good standard. You are actually complying, most likely, at a very higher standard than most businesses out there. The sort of middle is a 3. That's satisfactory. If you're a 3, you're complying with the requirements pretty much of law. There might be the odd thing you're not doing properly, but it's not that significant. But of course, if you have a 3, the aim would be to try and get to a 5, because just go the extra mile. However, once you drop below a 3, you're heading into pretty poor territory. So a 2 is improvement is necessary. The standards have dropped really below what one would expect in a food business. If you're a 1, then it's major improvement. I mean, really, this is not great. But a 0 are those special little premises that when I had a career as an enforcement officer, spent much of my time, because those are premises where really there are very poor standards, poor compliance with law, and urgent attention is required. So there we are. We go from 5 to 0. The provision of the information is by stickers. So as I said, in Wales and Northern Ireland, the stickers will be applied at points of entry of the consumer. So you go to a restaurant, you will see the sticker as you go into the restaurant and when you're choosing your food. But it is all available on the Food Standards Agency website. If you go to the Food Standards Agency website and look at hygiene ratings, if you know the business name, a postcode or town or city, whatever it might be, then you should be able to get the rating relatively easily. Now, where does the rating come from? Well, for the last, actually, it's over 30 years, food inspectors have been using a statutory code of practice to rate every food business they visit. So it goes back to about 1991, I think, the Food Law Code of Practice was introduced, setting out a risk rating scheme for hygiene. So the risk rating scheme that is actually behind the rating that you see on a sticker for a food premises, the actual scheme itself was designed for a different purpose. It was actually designed to determine the frequency of inspection of a business by a food inspector and the nature of that inspection when they got there. So basically, what we're talking about, what am I saying? If you've got a restaurant, in the Food Law Code of Practice, the officer would go through a series of criteria. Part 1 would be a description of the sort of thing. It's a high street business doing routine catering. So a score would be attributed to Part 1 based on the type of business. Then Part 2 was the level of current compliance that the officer found on the day in terms of hygiene, including hygiene rules and procedures being applied, and structure, so the structure and cleaning of the premises. And then lastly, the confidence in management of the manager themselves, but also in the confidence in the management control system, the food safety management system. So that was used to come up with a score, and the higher the score, the more frequent the visit to the establishment. The lower the score, then the establishment will be visited less frequently. There's not really rocket science behind that. So for the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme, the scheme uses not Part 1, so that's ignored by the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme. It focuses in on Part 2 and Part 3. It ignores the bit on the bottom, significant risk. Don't worry about that. So what an officer is doing when they're rating your business for food hygiene rating, they're making a judgment on the hygiene. So that would include the hygiene practices and procedures. They'll be looking at the structure, the cleaning. They'll be looking at the confidence they have in you as a food business operator in terms of your instruction and supervision, but also your management system. So if you're using Safer Food, Better Business, for example, whether they're looking at the confidence in that, whether it's been done properly and completely. And that is how they derive their score. So there are 3 basic categories out there. There are categories that fall within the scope of the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme, and the general principle is if they supply food directly to consumers, then they will be rated. But there are some exceptions. There are some businesses that do supply consumers directly, but have been withdrawn from the scheme because of it's just not appropriate to include them. And then there are businesses that don't supply. So in England, if you don't supply products to the final consumer, then you won't be included in the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme. So how does it work in practice? Well, in order to convert the risk rating number that the food inspector generates when they inspect a food business to a risk rating score that turns up in your window. So turning this rating that will determine the frequency and nature of inspection to a 0 to 5 on your window, the food inspector will have reference to the brand standard. Now, a copy of this is available on our website to download, but you can get one from the Food Standards Agency website. It explains how the scheme works in great detail. But the basic fundamental principles are scoring, mapping, notification, the right to reply, and then re-inspection. So the scoring. An officer will only provide a score if they've carried out an inspection, a partial inspection or audit. In other words, they've gone through your systems in enough detail. If they've merely popped in to take a sample, they won't rate you. If they've come in just to look at one feature of your business, they won't rate your business. They'll only rate them once they've had an opportunity to look at all the issues that are relevant to that rating. There could be a re-inspection. So, if you've the officer has carried out an inspection, you have the right to request a re-inspection at a later date. And the re-inspection might just focus on those specific issues that were a problem before. It is a physical visit to the premises, although the Food Standards Agency are exploring different ways. Obviously, during lockdown, it made it a bit difficult. So there are currently research projects going on looking at how this might be achieved through virtual visits, but physical inspections is the only really way to properly assess a business. The guidance on the scoring to the officer will go to the brand standard, but there is this clear hierarchy. In order for an officer to score your business and to look at something and for it to influence the score, the first question the officer will be asking in their own mind is this a breach of law? Are they looking at a breach of law? If it's not a breach of law, then that cannot affect your food hygiene rating. Okay, so food hygiene ratings will only get dented, if you like, if you're not doing something you're legally required to do. If you're not doing something that would be a good idea, well, that won't affect your rating. Secondly, the officer will go to the Food Law Code of Practice, because in the Food Law Code of Practice, they're given a brief description for each issue, like food hygiene, food structure. They're given a sentence or two. And if they've identified a breach of law, they've gone to the Food Law Code of Practice, and now they're satisfied, they'll give you your score. However, what tends to happen in practice is after identifying a breach of law and a reference to the Food Law Code of Practice, the officer will refer to the brand standard. If you have a look at the brand standard, that's really tiny writing, isn't it? So you won't read that. But each score is given a description. The bit from the Food Law Code of Practice is included in there, the few paragraphs on each score, and a description of what that score might look like in practice is provided to the officer. So it will have a score of 0. We'll say in the Food Law Code of Practice that the business has got an excellent record of compliance. And it will say in the description that the food business operator is perfectly able to describe their systems and demonstrate full compliance. So a 0 score on a rating is always going to give the best result. Once they go through their hygiene, structure and confidence in management scores, the officers will total up the scores. Now the scores go from sort of 0 to 30 typically, or 0 to 20 on each of those categories. If you get 0 for hygiene, 0 for structure, 0 for confidence in manager, you've got the highest score. So a score of 0 is going to mean you're going to get a 5, because in a total intervention rating, as long as no individual score is greater than 5 for hygiene, structure, confidence in management, and as long as it doesn't go above 15, which it wouldn't, then you're going to get a 5. So on the risk rating, officers, the top 2 categories are 0 and 5. Hygiene, structure, 0 and 5, 0 and 5, 0 and 5. So there is a little leeway for a little bit of minor non-compliance, but it is really minor and it's not a big deal at all. If you've got a score combined of hygiene, structure, confidence in management, and the score adds up to 20, and no individual score goes higher than 10, so you might get I don't know, a 10 for hygiene, 5 for structure, 5 for confidence in management. I don't know how that works, but anyway, there we are. You've got a total of 20, nothing's more than 10, you'll get a 4. If you've got no greater than a 10, but you've got the total score is 25 to 30, so you might have got 10 for hygiene, 10 for structure, 10 for confidence in management. You've not got anything greater than 10, but you've ended up with 30, you'll get a 3. And that is satisfactory. That means that's pretty good going, but it could get better. It's only when you go higher scores than that. If you score an individual score of 15, then you're only going to get a 2. So even if you get a 5 on structure, if you get a 15 on confidence and management, you're going to be a 2. You might get a 5 for hygiene, 5 for structure, and a 15. You're going to be a 2. If you get a score of 20 anywhere in there, so in other words, the confidence they have in you and your management system is vital here, because on the day it might be clean, on the day it might be fine, but if they look at your systems and say, well, your systems are rubbish, you've fluked it today, you might get 5, 5, 20, in which case you're getting a 1. So you can see how it's not just about being good on the day of the inspection, it's demonstrating to the officer that you can be good every day, and that's because of you as a manager and your systems. The officer will notify you of the score at the time of the inspection, but you'll get written notification within 14 days. You have a right of reply. There's also a right of appeal, and the right of apply can be published on the Food Standards Agency website. There might be a reason. It was poor that day because I was on holiday, or on that day my staff all phoned in sick. Now that's mitigation. If you were not able to maintain a standard because you were on holiday or your staff were sick, you should have reflected, was it appropriate to open the premises? So, or get other measures in place. So there may be an explanation, but it's not really an excuse. So if you've got a poor rating, you really ought to do something about that. Re-inspection can be requested, because if you've had a bad day, you've got a bad rating, you've put everything in place, It's normally about 3 months after the initial inspection you can request, and most local authorities will charge you for that. But they will come back, they'll have a quick skip round, but they'll focus on the issues that were the contentious at the last, and you may well go from, you know, I don't know, a 1 to a 4 or something like that. And that's obviously the objective here. Okay, thank you for listening. That's just one video out of 100, so please join me on the 99 others. Again, thanks for listening. Cheers.